Welcome, authors, to Self-Publishing Insiders. I'm Jim Azevedo. I lead the marketing team here at Draft to Digital. We've got a good one for you today. Today, we're talking about the role fear plays in plot and character arc and how to write fear well. Now, I imagine writing fear is far from limited to just horror or thriller novels, because the emotion is so universal. It's so primal that it lives and breathes in every genre and can raise the stakes in every genre as well. Now, because of that, that's why I am so glad that today our guest is Becca Puglisi. Did I pronounce that right? Your last name right, Becca? I meant to ask you that backstage, and
Yeah, it's Puglisi. Close enough.
Puglisi.
Believe me, you don't sound like any of the telemarketers that call my house, so it's all good.
Oh, then I'll try again. So Becca is an international speaker. She's a writing coach and best-selling author of the Emotion Thesaurus and other resources for writers. Her books have sold over 1.4 million copies and are available in multiple languages, are sourced by U.S. universities, and are used by novelists, screenwriters, editors, and psychologists around the world. She is passionate about learning and sharing her knowledge with others through her Writers Helping Writers blog and via One Stop for Writers, which is a powerhouse online resource for writers that's home to the character builder and storytellers roadmap tools. Now, a lot of our discussion today, and this is the exciting part, a lot of our discussion today is going to be based on Becca's brand new book, which came out, was it yesterday or was it Sunday?
Yesterday.
Wow, congratulations. The new book is The Fear Thesaurus, a writer's guide to what holds characters back, that she co-authored with Angela Ackerman. So Becca, that was a long introduction, but needed because of your background. So welcome. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today and to be talking about this. This is, all Angela and I have been focused on for the past year. So very cool stuff.
I mean, the book is amazing. I've been through it. Thank you for sending me the arc. I've been going through it and checking out the chapters. It is super in depth, everybody. It's really cool. So the book's chapter headline alone is enough to kind of pull you in and keep you reading. And that's how I'm going to organize this chat, because I think as a craft book, it's a fascinating piece of work. Mm-hmm. Then as you read the chapter headlines, if the chapters didn't dive deep enough for you, the thesaurus section that follows defines each fear type, like survival, stability and control, relationships, identity, and existential and moral fears. But then you think, well, God, that's so much information. But that's not all, because once you get down into the thesaurus, Becca talks about what it's like, the common internal struggles, hindrances, and disruptions to the character's life. And there's just so much more to it. But before we dive into all of that, Becca, can you give our listeners just a really quick picture of what Writers Helping Writers is all about, who it serves, and then we'll go into the book.
Sure. So Angela Ackerman and I started Writers Helping Writers in 2008. And it started as a blog, and it's basically a collection of resources for just all the things that we have learned ourselves as authors over the years, things we've struggled with, things we needed solutions to. And so we have, a whole bunch of blog material there going back many years. But we also have, we have written a series of books that focus on different aspects of storytelling. They all tackle a certain aspect of show, don't tell, to help writers get better at that, because every writer struggles with that. We all have to kind of come to grips with that and figure out, how to show and not tell. And so we have just this collection of books that we have made available. The latest one just came out yesterday. And so those, information about those books are available on the site, and it's just got a lot of content on lots of different aspects of storytelling that you can, anything that you're struggling with, you can probably find something to help you there.
Okay, perfect. Is this book the 11th book in the Thesaurus series?
It is.
Do you want to mention what the other books are, just so they kind of have an idea of what the whole series includes?
I would love to. The first one was the Emotion Thesaurus. That's the one that most people are familiar with. Okay. We started actually blogging that thesaurus on our blog before we had any idea what we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And found out that emotion is like a really hard thing to write well. And so lots and lots of people were very interested in that content. So we turned it into a book, and then we were like, okay, well, what other areas of writing are we struggling with that other people are probably struggling with? And so we wrote a set of character trait books. One is negative traits, one's positive traits, where those come from, what they look like, how you kind of build those into your character in a really natural, authentic way. We have 2 setting books, one on rural and one on urban settings, to help you write all the locations that you may not be able to get to firsthand to visit. It's got all the sensory details for those. We have conflict thesaurus. We have an emotional wound thesaurus to talk about backstory and all the important pieces of backstory that lead into who your character is when your actual story starts. I'm missing something in there, but there's just, lots of again, Angela and I, started out writing ourselves, and really we just looked at what are we having a hard time with that other people, might benefit from what we learn. And that's how we've structured the series, is tackling those topics.
Well, that's very generous of both of you. Now, the first chapter, it calls fear a primal force in fiction and in life. And I think most authors think of fear as like scene level emotion, like a tense moment or a jump scare, but you're positioning it as something that's much bigger. So can you go through that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really both. It's fear as a universal emotion that we all experience. And, it happens on various levels. You have the kind of mild, jump scare kind of things that come up and make you afraid, and then it goes away and then you're fine. But then we also have these debilitating fears that kind of, they grab hold of us, and they really limit us in life, because this is just from a basic psychology standpoint, we all have these big fears, like the fear of losing someone, the fear of dying, the fear of change, fear of failure, all of these things that we're so afraid of those things happening that we refashion kind of our lives around avoiding those things or keeping that thing from occurring. And it limits us in some ways. So when we take that and we apply that to our characters, you've got, the garden variety fear that happens on the scene level, just situational. But then you also have this deep gnawing fear that is motivating them and really driving their choices, driving some of what they will and won't do. And it is something that ties deeply into character arc, because in order for them to succeed in the story, they're going to have to deal with, face, and overcome, or at least learn to control that fear. And once they do that, then they're able to kind of grow and make change that is going to enable them to get what they need the most. So it is a scene level, but it's also a story level, depending on what you're dealing with.
Okay. You have a chapter called The Prom Queen of Dark Emotions, and I love that title. But what does it mean, and why does fear get the crown?
I think it's because emotions, by and large, are fleeting. They come and go depending on what's happening. But again, fear is it's hugely driving. Whatever we're afraid of, we're gonna do whatever we can. We're gonna make a lot of changes in our lives to keep that from happening and to keep safe from that. So whereas other emotions kind of come and go, fear is a driver. And so when we add that into our characters, into their backstory, and then into what they're dealing with in the current story, it makes stories so much more engaging and very relatable for readers, because they've all been there. We all have these things. And so when we see a character who is struggling with a particular thing that keeps tripping them up over and over, and it's keeping them from getting what they want, that's going to make them happy and fulfilled, we cheer for them. We're rooting for them. We want them to do well. And we're going to stick with it so that we can see that they're going to be okay by the end. And so that's why it's so important in storytelling.
Yeah, that's perfect. So you just give a really quick synopsis of the first 3 chapters, which is perfect. We're just moving perfect right along. I was going to ask you the next question. I'm like, nope, she answered that one about how fear connects to human needs, which is nailed it.
That's really interesting. I mean, almost every book that we've written, Maslow's hierarchy, the little pyramid, ends up in there, because so much of that is tied to just basic human motivation. And so that we need to know what's motivating our characters in order to give them, goals that make sense for them, that tie into some of these backstory elements of wounding events and fear, and then the emotional shielding that comes out after that, those kind of traits and behaviors and beliefs that we get after something terrible happens to us, those things become things that block us as well. So the human needs is that's just super interesting to me, because it ties into so much of who we are as people, and then that should apply to our characters too.
That's one of the things I love about the book. As I was going through it, it's like, oh, I've never would have even thought about this if I didn't see it right here on the page. And oh my goodness, that makes so much sense.
Good. That's good. I'm glad that it makes sense.
Yeah. Now, as we move along through the book, we're getting toward like the sort of the middle section, and you start talking about fear intensity levels. Can you walk us through how fear exists on a spectrum? Because a character feeling embarrassment is going to be a lot different than a character who's staring death in the face, and right. Both those characters aren't operating the same way, are they?
Yeah, and that's a really important thing to kind of figure out as an author, because there are different intensities of fear, and we need lots of different fearful moments in the story. Some of those need to be small, some of them need to be kind of big and impactful. And if we apply the wrong fear at the wrong time, that we end up with some melodrama, some things that don't make sense, and it's just like an overreaction, and it doesn't read as authentic to the readers. So we look at the levels of fear. We used a metaphor of an elevator in a building. So the fears at the top, at the penthouse, are like the most mild fears that you have. These are just things that kind of alarm you in the moment, and then you realize, oh, everything's fine, and it's no big deal. So it's very, very fleeting. And as you go down, you get into more serious fears. You have, I can't remember what they all are right now, but it starts out with mild, and as you go down, you get into more like you have persistent fears that you have, they're there and you've addressed them, but they kind of keep coming back, and you're having to constantly like shove them aside or not give in to them. And then you get to things like that are very debilitating, like phobias, which are, there are fears, but they're also like a class of anxiety disorder. So it's a very big, what do you call it? A response that doesn't exactly match what is happening, because, in that moment the panic has taken over and you're not exactly thinking logically. Those are very driving, because, if you have a serious phobia of something, you're definitely going to do whatever you can to kind of stay away from that and keep that out of your life. And then in the basement, we have the most like insidious and kind of really difficult fears. And those are the ones that come out of wounding events from the past. Something happens to you, let's say you're carjacked. That becomes a very vivid and emotional and difficult thing for you to kind of deal with. And so you don't want that to ever happen again. And so you start thinking about, okay, well, why did this happen? And I want to keep it from happening again. You develop a fear of it happening again. And that really becomes like a deep driving fear for you. Yeah. And so then you start changing certain patterns in your life. Maybe you stop driving yourself. You're just going to take public transportation. That's fine. It's a little inconvenient, but it's worth keeping that from happening again. And then that starts to impact your relationships, because, you can't take your kids here and you can't drive them over there. And so it just creates like this snowball effect of difficulty in other areas of life. So those wound-based events are the ones that just cling, and they kind of disseminate into the rest of your life and start infecting other areas. And so you want to know what the fear needs are in the scene that you're writing. You want to fashion your character's arc around a deeply personal fear that's usually in real life is tied to a wounding event. So that's what we encourage people to do. And that is going to impact throughout the story. But then as you're just fashioning scenes, you're going to need, moments of tension, things that increase tension or that increase uncertainty for the reader. Oh, what's happening? Is the character going to be okay? all of these different things. So you want to kind of look at the different level of intensity and see, okay, what kind of a fear makes sense here? This one isn't going to like take off and go through the whole story, but it's going to be in the scene and they're going to have to deal with it. And so that's kind of like why it's important to just recognize that fear does run on a spectrum and that there are different levels, and know what you need at that moment in your story.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. When we're talking about the role of fear in fiction, now for writers who might be underusing fear, what do you think they're leaving on the table, sort of narratively?
Yeah, I think that the fear itself, I mean, we understand, okay, fear is an emotion, and a character's going to feel that, and I'm going to need to write their responses accurately throughout the story, and I've got that part. But again, the how the fear is a critical piece of your character's arc, that they're going to have to overcome. So I think a lot of people, when we talk about character arc, they know, okay, there's like a trauma, something happened, that has changed who they are. And so now in the story, they're struggling because of these habits and ideas and biases and, all these things that come out of a traumatic event. And those things are blocking them from getting what they most want, from achieving their story goal. And so they have to overcome those things. And so that's kind of like the general idea that I think a lot of people have about character arc. But the fear is at the center of it. Whatever happened to them, their fear is that it's going to happen again, or something similar to it is going to happen again. And so that fear is what is actually causing them to adopt new traits that maybe aren't so healthy. They're protecting them, but they're creating problems in other areas. Or to adopt a lie about what happened, that they blame themselves or they blame someone else. All of these things are coming out of the fear. And so you can deal with those other things, but until the character deals with their fear, if it was a real life person, they would still continue to have the same struggles. So that fear, figuring out what it is for the character is crucial, I think, in writing a character that has a complete arc, that is like fully complete. I think that would be the biggest thing.
Okay, this is a fun conversation. Let me bring up a quick comment here from the audience. This is from Layla Bell VT. I appreciate this comment because she says, I feel like there's a lot of talk about character wants and motivations, but not as much about fears.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, we think about it again kind of on a surface level, but it's a pivotal part, I think, of a strong character arc, because it just ties exactly back to what we deal with as human beings, how we overcome things. That's what we want to mirror in our stories.
Okay. A fascinating chapter to me is chapter 6. I think it's chapter 6, uncovering a character's greatest fear. How does a writer find that? And is it something that they have to excavate, or is it something that you design from the start?
I think that's the beauty of character arc in general, and how when you understand that one thing leads into the other, that you can work kind of from anywhere in the process, whatever way works best for you, to either figure out the rest or to work backwards. So if you know what your character's wounding event is, then you can easily find a fear that is going to lead out of that. And then you've got two pieces that are plugging together perfectly, like puzzle pieces. If you know what your character's goal is, because a lot of people start with, okay, I don't know a lot about my character, but I know what the story is about. It's about somebody trying to catch a killer, or somebody trying to find true love. If you know what the goal is, well, then you can think back to think, okay, well, what wounding event might have happened that would have impacted a love and belonging need? And that's why they're pursuing this goal of finding true love, because they know that's subconsciously that's going to fill that need for them. And then when you figure out the wound based on the goal, you can figure out a fear that comes out of it that's going to be blocking them. So you can work all along that process of what a character arc is, and work backward or forward. The wounding event, I think, is the easiest thing because it's usually pretty obvious what fear you would have if you experienced X. But we also talk about other ways that you can kind of, if you're just starting out, or if you're really brainstorming your character, you can also look at their secrets. What is the thing that they're hiding that they don't want anybody to know? That very often is going to be tied back to a wounding event and a fear that's related to it. And we talk about too, if you're just starting out planning your story, you can always explore the fears that you want to explore, maybe because it's something that is interesting to you, or because it's something that you have personal experience with, giving that to a character and then creating a character arc around it. all of those good ways to kind of figure out what that greatest fear might be.
I love this. I love how clear all of this is and how you're articulating all of it. I mean, you guys, can you just imagine what the book is like if we're hearing this real time? And speaking of that, another comment, can I buy your book directly from you, or do I have to go through Amazon?
I like the frowny face there. That's good. No, we have our books available on our Shopify store where they can be bought direct. It just went for live only on our Shopify store yesterday. And there is, I think I can provide the Shopify link, but if you go to our bookstore on our website, it'll take you to the books at the Shopify store.
Is that the Writers Helping Writers website?
Yes.
Okay. So
perfect.
There it is, everybody. I'll leave that up there for a second. Okay. So this is really cool. So moving along through the book and the chapters, I want to talk about authentic fear responses. What does inauthentic fear look like in fiction? So what are readers actually sensing when fear feels, I guess, false?
Yeah, I think that it's, in this case, it's really very similar to any inauthentic emotional response, whatever emotion you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. I think that melodrama is the big one with fear, because when people overreact to it, it obviously feels like, why is she acting this way? Why is he acting this way? And then under responses too, when you feel like, okay, something major just happened and then the character is not really responding to it. It's like, okay, what's going on? Is there something else going on? Maybe not. Maybe it's just a poorly written fear response that's going to confuse readers. So the biggest thing with writing any emotion, including fear, is to know your character, to get to know your character really well, so that you have like an emotional baseline for them, so that you know how they're going to respond and what's normal for them. So you want to think about things like introversion, extroversion. Are they somebody who's going to have big emotional responses and that is who they are, so that's going to how they're going to react all the time? Or is it somebody who is more, keeping their feelings not quite as obvious? That's just not the way that they are. They're not comfortable expressing, or they just don't express things very big. That's one thing to consider. And then you also want to think about, their personality traits. If somebody is flamboyant and if they're very verbose, different traits are going to express emotion bigger than other traits where their emotions just aren't going to be, they're going to be more subdued. So when you can just put together a baseline for your character emotionally, then you can figure out what their regular responses are. And then you can ask yourself, okay, how is this character going to react when they're happy? What are they going to look like when they're mad? What are they going to look like when they're afraid? And then kind of the norm, so that when you do need a big response, you have to hit them harder with something that is a bigger fear or a bigger situation, and then they will have that bigger response that makes sense. It's all about getting to know your character before you really start writing, so that when you write, it's consistent, and that's going to read as authentic to readers, because they recognize, what a normal response is. And then sometimes when you do that, it also sets you up for some subterfuge, where you can have a situation where there is an unusual response and readers sit up and go, what does that mean? What's going on? Because there's some subtext there. There's a reason why the character reacted differently than was expected. And then it creates that interest in the character and figuring out, what's going on there. So I think that, when you do get to know your character, it leads to so many really good things when you're trying to convey their emotion accurately.
Okay. You've written that, this kind of goes along with that when fear hits a person or a character, it affects the body, the mind, and the behavior all at once. Do writers, or would you recommend writers covering all three of those aspects for every fear response, or does it matter at the type of fear, or is that necessary for every fear?
I do think it's some of it is going to depend on what you need in that moment in the story. Some of it is going to depend on the character. So there is a response to how fear works and how it kind of sets off like a chain reaction. I'm trying to find that little visual in the book. Anyway, it's it starts with the stimulus. So something happens that triggers the fear. That's the first thing, is the stimulus. And then it goes into, I can't find it. So then it goes into, you have stimulus and you have thoughts that are based on what happened. And those are usually very quick. Like, we don't spend a long time pondering, why we're scared of what's happening, but that is our processing mechanism. And then you have a response that comes out of that. And you don't want to, write that every single time for every, fearful thing that happens. So a lot of that is just truncated and shortened. But there is a reason to do at least some of the background or inside stuff that's happening so that it makes sense. Sometimes it's very obvious and you don't need to explain what the character is thinking about, the alligator rushing out of the water at them. That's very obvious. I'm sorry, I live in Florida, so I go to alligators. So that's very obvious and you don't really have to do any background or any of the internal stuff. But sometimes it's necessary to give readers a little insight into the character's thought process on what has happened, especially if it's something that's a little more subtle. Maybe it's relational. Maybe they're dealing with someone they have a history with, and normally what happened would not be a big deal, but it is because of what they've experienced with this person. So I think it really depends on the scene and what's happening. One thing that you want to be careful about is when you have like it's supposed to be a really fearful scene or something that is high intensity. You don't want to get into like what they're thinking, because in that moment, a real person would not stop to think about things. They would be running, or they would be fighting, or they would be doing whatever their response is. So if you're writing like a scene that has really big things happening, you can skip that stuff and just go right to the response. Like, car chases, somebody who's running for their life. I mean, those kind of things you want to be careful with, going over too much the internal process, and just get right from the stimulus to the response.
Okay, that was a perfect segue into this next question. And apologies if I'm going to repeat some of what you just said, but I just want to kind of frame this next question, because you're talking about scenes. So I wanted to ask you about how you go about crafting the fear-driven scene. Specifically, what's the difference between a scene about fear and a scene driven by fear?
Well, I think that most scenes are not about fear. I think fear is a result of what's happening in the scene. So I would say that we talk a lot in the book about how to kind of set up scenes where fear is driving the character. So it's something that is playing a big part in what they're doing and how they're responding. So we talk about two different approaches to those kinds of scenes. There's the Scream approach, which is the Scream, the movie that most people are familiar with, where everything happens very quickly. And there's not a lot of buildup. There's not a lot of explanation. If you think about the Scream movie, one of the things you remember is that first scene shocked everybody when they saw it for the first time, because it was so intense and it happened so quickly. And they killed off the only person that anybody knew in the whole movie, the only actress. So, it was all this very shocking thing. And that is, has a place in certain kinds of stories and certain kinds of scenes. I would think that happens more often in horrors or in thrillers. But the more common kind of theme is the slow build when you're talking about fear. And it's important in most stories. You want to know how to kind of put that together so that the scene builds and it escalates and it builds tension over time. It has kind of a smooth flow. So we talk about doing things like adding things that are going to increase that tension over time. So if you layer in some foreshadowing beforehand, then the reader's going to be kind of ready. They're looking for it, they're waiting for it, and then when it happens, they're really into it and they're engaged. You can add a few hidden threats that are hidden to the character, but the readers know that they're there. So now they're getting excited because they come in the room and they know that something is in the room and they know that it's going to be happening soon. Symbolism, it's all about, I think, subtlety and kind of laying the breadcrumbs for readers so that you're dropping hints either before or in the scene. You've set up certain things so that when something specific happens and the fear starts going, it can just go. And it feels very natural and the readers are primed for it and they're ready to kind of go on that ride with the character. And, there's lots of things that you can do to build that tension slowly, and just by adding in one thing and then adding in another thing and then adding in another element, to kind of keep that going, to get to the point where you want them to get to.
I'm smiling because as you were describing that, I can feel myself feeling more and more tense, like, oh, she's going to lead me down this path.
Right.
And I'm going to start like I'm just waiting for it.
It's really cool because these elements are kind of, they're universal and they can be used in any story. I mean, we talk about using contrast, false flags to kind of mislead the character, but the reader's like, no, don't do that, because that's not what's happening. Weather, is something that gets kind of a bad rep because it's been cliched so often, the storm that's building, and it's increasing tension right before everything happens. But you can use, because weather's universal, again, everybody kind of, we have almost an animal response to weather. Like, a dog in a thunderstorm, if everybody has ever had a dog during a thunderstorm, you can see that physical response. And so when we can use weather, it's actually very effective with, not having to spend so many words. So there's just lots of things that you can do to build tension and take readers on that ride.
Okay. The next chapter, which I think is chapter 9, could almost be its own book. And that is, and it's fun, how villains and antagonists use fear as a weapon. What makes fear uniquely powerful as sort of a tool of antagonism?
I think it's kind of not what I expected when I started actually reading about it and researching it.
Oh, really?
I think that the biggest difference between protagonists and antagonists is not how they wield fear, but how they respond to it. So, like,
that's counterintuitive.
Their everyday responses are the same. I mean, if a hero and a villain are both, encounter something that's scary, they're going to have the same physiological responses, even some of the same mental responses. But they each should have their own fear that's driving them. So we know very often what that is for the protagonist, but villains and other adversaries don't often have their whole complete arc. And so that's why I think a lot of times they feel a little bit cardboard, a little bit obvious. But when we do build that arc for them, we can see what wounded them, what fear do they have now, why that's driving them. A lot of times it's a fear of not being in control. It's a fear of being hurt and being vulnerable. So they've just gone to great extremes to keep that keep from having to suffer in that way again. So protagonists, they go through their change arc. They become aware of their fear at some point. They have opportunities to face it and deal with it. They don't always make the right choice in terms of moving forward, but they are moving forward. And eventually they have this big climax where they have to choose, am I going to continue the way that I have been going along and be driven by my fear and be limited by it? Or am I going to reject it and I'm going to overcome it and I'm going to move forward? That's the arc of a change arc for a character. It's a growth arc. Heroes, they don't have that same arc. So they still have a fear and it came out of the same kind of place and the process is the same. But at some point, they either refuse to acknowledge it, they're living in denial, or they embrace it. And they're like, okay, yeah, that is the most important thing in my life to keep that from happening again. And I'm going to go to great lengths, way more than like a traditional hero would go, in order to keep it from happening. And so they don't treat their own fear the same way. And then they do things that a hero would never do in order to keep their fear from becoming a reality. And so that's a big difference. But I think that it's interesting, as kind of blind as they are often to their own fear or not very self-aware, they're very attuned to the fear of others. And so they're able to look at other people, especially the person they're fighting against, and kind of see clearly like what they're afraid of. And then they can turn that against them and use it against them and manipulate them, as they are very good at doing very often. So it's very interesting that their journey is totally different, but it starts out very often exactly the same.
It's so interesting. I'm just intrigued right now because I had just finished reading a thriller novel, and you're explaining exactly what happened, because at the beginning, the antagonist, like, you didn't know the antagonist was, the antagonist. He was the villain for the longest time. But then when you find out he was the villain, it was like, well, it just seemed, to me, it just kind of landed flat. And then it was maybe 3/4 of the way through the book where you start to hear or learn more about the backstory of the antagonist, and it all started to make sense. And then you could see where the hero was going to start to manipulate the antagonist to finally, like, put him down or whatever. But it's, this is really cool. This is such a fun conversation.
Good.
Okay. Let's see. I'm looking at the clock here real quick. Okay. I just want to make sure we've got enough time, because I want to jump into the thesaurus section and mistakes. In chapter 10, you cover common mistakes when writing fear. What is the mistake that you see the most often, even from best-selling authors, experienced writers?
I think fear is one of those things that where if you do it well, you don't really think about it, you don't notice it, but when you do it wrong, it's super obvious. And I think a lot of people, like, I'm thinking of the successful stories that I've read, and I think that it's handled pretty well most of the time. But again, I think that melodrama is a very easy thing to see, and it's a very easy way to go when you're writing fear. And that's just where you don't really know your character well enough. You don't know how their responses should be, and maybe you don't know normal responses, from everyday people enough. So you do have to do your background and just study, look at people, especially like watching movies or reading books where the characterization is really well done, seeing how fear represents and what people do and how they talk and the changes that happen to them when they're feeling it. So that's the first thing I think that a lot of people don't do, is the background piece. I think that sometimes people focus on, when you're looking at that fear as part of a character arc, they focus on the wrong one. Sometimes it's like a secondary fear that isn't really at the root, because fears do kind of go in pairs. It's not just, you don't have one fear. You're worried about a lot of different things. And so it's easy to pick up on this makes sense. And it relates to the journey that they're going to be going on, but it doesn't tie firmly back into the wounding event. I think that those do need to be connected together so that it all makes sense. And you can kind of track the journey from way back before the story starts, and then as the story goes along. So picking the wrong fear, picking kind of insignificant fears that aren't big enough to support a whole character arc journey. And I think we look a lot of times at phobias that way, like, oh, this is really dramatic and it's kind of unusual. So that makes sense for, my hero to have that fear. But again, it has to tie into all the other pieces, and it has to, be able to support, the story that you're telling. So I think focusing on the wrong overall fear, melodrama is a big deal. And then fear that the fear journey that resolves too quickly, like you've got the whole character arc and they're kind of struggling and they're moving along, and all of a sudden they have a big moment and they resolve it and then the story ends. It's got to be that slow, steady arc as they go along. And so that's where your scene planning is very important, and making sure that you have the proper buildup over the course of the story, where it's not like all happening in the first half or all happening in the second half. It's got to be kind of evenly spaced out.
Okay, perfect. Now the thesaurus section itself, you've categorized fears into different types. There's survival, stability and control, relationship, identity, existential, and moral. So I wanted to quickly ask you, how did you land on those categories? And did any fears sort of surprise you as far as, I don't know, maybe landing in an unexpected bucket?
To be honest, that is the categories that we chose were just the way we kind of found to put them into buckets. I think that you probably could categorize them a number of different ways. That was just where we landed. Having we had the list of fears, and then we started looking at them. Okay, what's common between these? Like how could they be sorted? And that really worked, because they all, fit into those. And I do think that fears some of them are a little ambiguous and could fit into more than one. And I think that depending on your character's unmet need, whichever one of those is voided, I think that's going to really determine if you have a fear that could go into either category, it's going to relate more back to their unmet needs. So if they're, missing safety and security, that fear is going to be security and stability based, because that's the thing that is tied up in what they're trying to avoid and then what they're trying to do to fill that void. So that's really how we came up with those. And I think it seems to work. They also relate back to all of the needs in the hierarchy. So you have survival fears are, related to physiological needs that are missing. Love and belonging relate to relationship fears. So they tie together that way as well.
Okay. Just want to bring up a quick comment here from the audience, from Beth Bliss. Hi, Beth. And Beth says, I'm not a big emotional reactor. So when I see a big reaction in someone else, I assume, often wrongly, it's a big, terrible situation. I don't think you're alone, Beth. So
I think that's okay. The right response, Beth.
Yeah. Group hug. Okay. So where was I? So again, still on the thesaurus section here. Each fear section or each fear entry includes things like emotional wounds it could stem from and human needs that could be impacted, which is, it's really cool because it's a character building engine. At least it feels like it could be like that. So how do you see writers using this in practice? Are they starting from the fear and working outward, or are they coming to it more from the wound side?
Again, it can work either way. I mean, you can use this book to brainstorm fears. You can kind of look at the table of contents and then look at fears that sound like they might be a good fit. And then you can find the one that fits into your character's backstory and then is going to fit into their current story that you're going to tell. So there is a lot of brainstorming help in the book. But I think that people also can come to it when they know their character's arc. They know what the fear is, and they can come and find the fear, or they can find one that's really close to it. And they can then look at it and figure out, okay, this is what it could look like for my character. These are some of the things that they're going to exhibit. Yes, this makes sense with what I know about them already. They can, we have scenarios that could trigger the fear. So that helps you kind of build in conflict that is going to create those choice moments for them where they have to decide, am I going to give in to my fear and retreat, or am I going to fight against it and move forward? We have ways that the character can minimize or overcome it. So again, those are specific choices and situations that you can use when in those turning point moments, when you need them to move forward. You don't want them to revert. You need them to be progressing. Those can, be specific situations that will help them make the right choice as they're facing their fears. Internal struggles, those are important as well, because those are deeply personal to readers. And so when they see it in a character, those are good too. So it really can work either way. I mean, what I always tell people to do also is, if you have a fear, or whatever thesaurus you're looking at, if you have a fear that's not in here, you can make up your own. You can use the format to, create for that specific fear, your specific character. Here's what it looks like for them. Here's what they're struggling with internally. This is exactly how it's hindering them in their life. There's nothing to stop anybody from building on that for their specific character.
I almost can't imagine somebody thinking of something that's not covered in the book, because the book is very comprehensive. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job.
Well, thank you. There's so many fears though. We always run into this problem when we're writing a new book, is we always have way more ideas than can fit into a manageably sized book. So there's always a few. We'll get, calls. Why didn't you do this one? Sorry.
Is the book available in ebook and print? And
yes. You can get it as an EPUB or a PDF, and you can get it in paperback.
Okay. And can people find more about the book at the website? That's writershelpingwriters.net.
Absolutely. So if you go there and you just click on the bookstore tab, it shows you all of our books. And then you click on the individual book, and it's got a whole page with information about what the book is about, what you can find in the book, and then, purchasing options where you can go to get them.
Okay. Is it available through the website and everywhere else too?
It is available right now just at our Shopify store.
Okay.
And then May 12th, it'll be available everywhere else.
Okay. Oh yeah, I did read May 12th. I keep thinking April 12th. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic. It was so eye-opening just to go through the book itself and to hear you talk through it. So
Awesome.
really
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, I thought, oh, this is a really cool topic. That was before I opened the book. And then I was just like, wow, this is really, really cool. So awesome. We all really appreciate your time, Becca. For those of you who are watching right now and maybe listening later, just wanted to say thank you to you guys for joining us week in and week out. Just real quickly, just wanted to remind those of you out there, if you could do us a favor and share this episode, if you feel like you learned something from Becca, share it with your author friends, because it helps us to spread the word and attract more experts like Becca to come and visit us sometimes. And you can bookmark DDD Live if you want to know what our next topic and who our next guest is going to be. I don't think we have that loaded yet there, so maybe not do it today, but maybe tomorrow or the next day. And then finally, if you are maybe investigating self-publishing for the very first time, why not sign up for an account simply by going to draft2digital.com. One more time, Becca, thank you so much for your time. I hope that you'll consider coming back and seeing us for the next book, or even sooner than that. That would be fantastic. For everybody else, thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you here again next week, same place, same time. And Becca, if you wouldn't mind hanging out just backstage for a second, I'll meet you back there as soon as we play this commercial from G2D Print. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created D2D Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at draft2digital.com.